everybody. Welcome to this special Easter edition of The Seagull Has Landed. I'm doing something slightly different today, and I'm giving you an exclusive interview that I did with one of my favourite women scientists working in the environmental space, Dr. Shanna Swan, who is the world expert on plastic and plastic additives, the chemicals, and how they interrupt our lives, essentially, particularly when it comes to fertility. Now, I spoke to Shanna last year, so last summer. She was in Geneva for a catastrophic global plastics conference, which went very wrong. And she's still very upbeat, by the way. And she couldn't really talk much about what was going to happen next to her because it was all under wraps. But what did happen? Da-da! It's on at the moment. It's on Netflix, The Plastic Detox, which is incredible. And millions of people are now tuned in to Shanna's work. She'd already gone a bit viral, actually, by the time we talked, because she'd been on the Joe Rogan show. And there is also a connection between the impact of plastic chemicals and toxic masculinity. So that all kind of fits. But anyway, watch, learn. Nobody delivers information in such an accessible but vital, real way as Shanna. I felt like I'd done a PhD by the end of talking to her, but it was quite light touch, if that makes sense. But even if you just get from it the fact that you use your microwave differently at the end of watching or listening to her talk, that's a win. Enjoy it.
How is it?
Well, I think it's pretty terrible, actually. So I am not on the Science Coalition, and so I couldn't attend those. I could have been, but anyway, I'm not on. So I don't have the details of the progress, but I talked to my friends who are on it, and they say it's pretty depressing, as you heard from.
You've highlighted 3 items I saw that we should never use. Could you talk to me a little bit about those just to start with? What are they and why are they so critical?
Because of course there are many more than 3. I definitely, one thing is that you don't ever want to put food inside plastic and then warm it in any way. That is in the microwave. Sorry for that sound, but in the microwave or in the car or any other kind of heating, because the containers do not hold the polymers. They not hold the chemicals of concern, and those then leave the containers and go into the food and then go into us. We have a lot of evidence of that. And it doesn't have to be warm, by the way. It can be it's just faster if it's, because there's this more activity. Maybe I'll just tell you 2 examples. One is in the neonatal intensive care nursery, where newborns that are premature go, they're sitting in these plastic buckets, basically, and then they get fed nutrition and air and so on, fluids through plastic tubes. Everyone knows that story with the tubes. And so a group in Mount Sinai actually measured how much phthalates came into their urine when in relation to the number of tubes that went into them. So this is a very bad environment for especially rapidly developing organisms like premature newborns, and they're getting the phthalates from, and probably the bisphenols from, their beds, which are hard plastic, at a very critical time. So that's one example. Another example is a very small but nice experiment that was done in Eastern Europe, where they compared milking a cow by hand, right? So farmers milked it by hand and put the milk aside, and then they milked it with a milking machine, and the milking machine, of course, uses tubes, plastic tubes, that's soft plastic, DEHP, and so on, to collect the milk. And then they tested and found very low or no levels of phthalates in the hand milked milk and high levels in the machine milk. So that's just another example. You're frowning, but you see how
Well, I'm
it's the
frowning
same.
because it seems so overwhelming because these are things that I hadn't even considered. So if you think about the supply chain and how we get every single thing around us, plastic is every, I'm holding a
Yeah,
plastic
yeah,
pen,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
it's everywhere.
But when it goes directly into the body, as in the newborns, or it goes directly into something we're going to ingest as the milk, then it's even more direct than just being
Yeah,
around it. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So, so,
So
so
yeah,
those are the points of intervention, I guess, that you're looking for that direct contact, that unmitigated contact, I guess.
yeah. I mean, the question of what makes a good intervention is complicated. I mean, to do an intervention, I mean, why are you doing it? You might be doing it just for scientific reasons, just to show it matters for exposure. That's important, yes. And I also want to do it because we show people what's in their own bodies and they care about that.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons they care about that is because we can show them how it affects their health. So the interventions that my group does has to have those three properties: to lower exposure in a way that people are concerned about, so they take action, and then get a positive health outcome. Maybe their sperm count goes up, or maybe their BMI goes down, or maybe their their response to your antibody response to a vaccination might improve. We can talk more about those kinds of things. But for me, what convinces people is well, first of all, that they have power. They can take the power into their hands to change their exposure. That's very, important for people to feel, yes, I can do something about this. And the people that we've worked with and trying to change their exposure have been very receptive to this and very eager, I would say, to change their exposure. That's one thing. They have to have that willingness.
Do more people seem to be willing because more people are concerned
I
about
can't
the
tell
issue?
you that. I can't tell you that because I don't talk to right now I'm not talking to that many people, but because our interventions are small. The reason they're small is because they're very intensive, right?
Yeah.
So we actually first get their urine and see what's in their body right now. And you can, if I ask you how much phthalate is in your body, you would not know, right? But if you gave me a urine sample and I gave it to my colleague at Million Marker to test it, she would write back and say, okay, here's your levels of phthalates and bisphenols and parabens. You can know that.
Actually, I do know a little bit. I
Oh, you
mean, because
do?
I did your I did your test a while ago. It's not good.
Oh, right.
It's not good, Dr. Shanna. It wasn't good.
No? Uh,
No. But
who did?
I was able to make some interventions because it's a snapshot, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And the other lady that I was also tested at the same time, we have very similar lives, very similar jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And she was of the opinion that she had just been on holiday for 2 weeks in France or something, where she'd been eating really natural food, nothing in plastic, no plastic containers. So we sort of went through and like compared notes.
Yeah, yeah, great.
But it
Yeah.
did have a big impact on me because it made me very, very conscious of like tight plastic containers and all that kind of thing. But I never thought about stuff like the milk, like the other stuff that you're describing.
Yes, yes, because these chemicals are everywhere. So
Right. So maybe we should see it from an opportunistic point of view,
yeah,
and
yeah,
there is a lot.
yeah. It's fabric.
Yes.
And fabric is everywhere, of course, just like you know these chemicals. And it can be in your bedding, it could be in your uh sofas, right? It could be in the clothes you put on. And you're in England, yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I've been talking to some members of parliament actually who are interested in reducing chemicals in children's school uniforms. This is a campaign of one person is Baroness Boycott, but so awareness of the presence of particularly PFAS. So in the food containers, it's phthalates and estrogens. I mean, and estrogenic chemicals like the bisphenols, but for the clothing, it's the PFAS chemicals, and those are the chemicals that you know are used as stain resistors or water resistors or barriers of various kinds. So covering of pans and spatulas and anything that's going to be a barrier. You could think about PFAS. And so what do they do? You know, are you aware of what the risks of these are?
No, not really.
Yeah. Okay.
No.
So it's particularly important for kids, I think, because one of the things that I guess the major harm that we know of right now is that they interfere with antibody response. So they interfere with immune function. And this was shown by Philippe Grandjean, who's a wonderful scientist. He worked on the Faroe Islands, where the fisher people were being exposed to high levels of PFAS in the fish, which, by the way, we then can also get right in the fish. And he showed this relationship between PFAS exposure and antibody response. So it will lower your response to vaccines, for example, which is pretty critical right now. You know,
Yeah.
is one place you can see them. Furniture, any fabric. It's used in fabric. It's used in cooking utensils. It's used in many, many places. So yes, watch out for your shirts and clothing, but watch out for a lot of other things as well. Yeah.
So what do you do about those things? You just literally seek out alternatives?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
Is it always on labels that it's got PFAS in
no,
it? No.
no. And that's one of the problems that I think this treaty should be addressing, that the labeling of these chemicals, it's non-existent. You would never go to a store and buy a sheet and see on it PFAS.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
And so the only way you can know this really is to ask a scientist, read the literature. I don't know how you know this. Um, uh, yeah, I mean, one of the things that when we think about reducing the PFAS in children's school uniforms, I have to think about who would manufacture these free of PFAS. And then you see that's quite a complicated question. You have to have a manufacturer willing to make a change in his manufacturing process and to change the fabrics he's using and so on and so forth. So it goes quite a ways back and is very difficult. It's very difficult both for manufacturers to make these changes and for people to know when the changes have been made. There are some apps that are helpful. And I mean, one is called Clearya. We have in the US. I'm sure it's here too. Clearya. And there are others. Environmental Working Group, you probably have heard of, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they test a lot. They list a lot of products and their chemical contents. However, I should warn you that these organizations do not actually test the product. And that's kind of surprising to people because they think, oh, well, it got this rating, it's because it was tested. So what they actually do is they read labels. They read the label and they see what's listed as an ingredient. And then they go to these long lists of, I like to call them bad actors, chemicals that we don't want in our bodies or in our air or in our water. So these lists of harmful chemicals might be WHO, it might be in California where I live is Prop 65, but there are many organizations that have listed harmful chemicals. So then if they're, what these organizations do, like Environmental Working Group, is compare the actual label with the lists. Okay, so if it's listed as having a diethyl hexyl phthalate, for example, which is a chemical that I'm particularly concerned about, then they will give it a bad mark because that's an anti-androgen, lowers androgens, testosterone. So, but the warning here is that not all ingredients are actually listed on labels.
Mm.
So if it isn't on the label, without testing, there's no way to know. And the actual testing of the product is difficult and expensive. And think of the numbers of products that have to be tested. So I don't fault them for going to reading and analyzing labels, but it can't tell us everything.
So you're sort of describing and where we don't even know the full extent of what's in these products. I mean, it really is much worse
Yes.
than we
right,
fear, right?
Right. It could be, yes, depending on the product. And by the way, there are many exposures which are not through products. You could start with water. Treatment of water varies, of course, and I used to work in that area, but it's very complicated determining what's regulated and what is removed. And in our home, we have some control because we can process the water in a number of ways. And a very widespread one is filtration. So you can filter your water. Of course, the product of the filter is important, the properties of the filter and how often you change it and so on and so forth. And then there is distillation, which is what actually I do in my house. We have a countertop distiller. Distiller actually gets everything out quite well. It's a bit slow and maybe too niche for some people, but it is wonderful water that comes out of a distiller. Reverse osmosis is another way to do this. So, but I mean, really, people should not have to do this,
No, they shouldn't.
right?
They shouldn't. So what sort of thing are you protecting against? So you distill your water at home. What does that do?
It removes everything. So you understand the process, the water is boiled, it becomes steam. It's passed through a channel where to another container where it's condensed, and then it drops into the bottom of the container as water without anything coming along with it because it doesn't go into the steam. Any particles that are present will not pass into the steam, and then so they remain in the container. And actually, it surprises us all the time, my husband and I, that when he goes to clean out the container, it smells quite bad.
And but what are you mitigating against by doing that in terms of what plastic?
Everything, including microbes, including germs, including, and the plastics. And there's nothing that I know of that's passed into the steam.
What plastics are in water?
Everything is in water. Plastic particles, nanoparticles, microparticles, the chemicals themselves, pesticides, medications. It, it's just a nice toxic soup, if you will. And, so I think this again should be done centrally, but given that perhaps in some places in Europe it is done, filtered well and processed well. But for us, living in the United States, we need to do something in our home. And so those are the three things I know of: filtration, distillation, and reverse osmosis to remove these.
And you mentioned a chemical that you are particularly concerned about, an ingredient. It had lots of letters in and it started with dexameth something.
Say again?
It started with Dex, I think you said. Dexy. You said it was an
Anti-androgen. Yes.
Androgen,
Yes. Okay.
What's
Right.
it in?
So So, okay, let's step back and
Yes.
say, what chemicals are we concerned about, right? Because chemicals are in everything, right? Everything is made of chemicals. So some chemicals have, I'm sure you know this story, but have the ability to interfere with hormone function of various kinds.
Yes.
Right. And there are many hormones, arguably 80 in the body, and they are affected by different chemicals. So it has to do with the chemical property and what receptors they can bind to. So if you have a class of chemicals of particular concern to me are the phthalates, right? And so these are chemicals that are, for example, diethyl hexyl phthalate is the most common and the most potent, I think, which is, and then there's dibutyl phthalate and butyl benzyl phthalate. There's a whole class. There's a large class, and they have similar properties, although not identical, but they have the ability to make plastic soft. Okay, so whenever you see a soft tubing, like in this milking machine or in the baby's bassinets in the NICU, if it's a soft plastic or in the, that's going to have these phthalates in them. Another thing they do is they help products be absorbed through a membrane. So that's good for cosmetics. It's good for face cream. If you put some hand cream on your hand and then you come back in 20 minutes, look at it again, it's gone. Yes?
Mm.
It's been absorbed. Okay. Phthalates are put in that, so it will increase that absorption. Yeah.
And is that quite standard practice in personal care?
Standard. That's how they work. Yeah. They have to do that. They're also put into products to keep the scent and the color. So that points us to makeup, nail polish, lipstick, you name it. It holds the scent and the color. By the way, the absorption plays a role also in pesticides because these are added to pesticides to help the pesticide be absorbed into the plant. Right? So whenever you want something to be absorbed through a barrier, you add these phthalates. But the problem is that they have the ability to lower testosterone. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you that testosterone is pretty critical for human health, and it plays a huge role in reproductive function, and various kinds of, and we can talk about that if you want. So that's only one hormone we're talking about, testosterone or androgens. There's more than one, but that class. And then what else? So there's these, you've heard of BPA, everyone's heard of BPA,
Yeah.
bisphenol A. There are many bisphenols, A, C, D, blah, 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 blah. And they are, I like to call them the evil twins of the phthalates because they make plastic hard. So if you have a hard water bottle or a hard food storage container or any hard plastic, which we all intimately familiar with, then you are going to be exposed to the bisphenols. And the bisphenols are I call them the evil twin because while phthalates lower testosterone, bisphenols increase estrogen. Okay. And so that's another hormonal action. I talked to you briefly about the action of PFAS on immune function. That's a whole other pathway, a hormonal pathway. There are some of these that are called obesogens. They have the ability to increase body fat, and that's another hormonal function. There are others that affect brain function. So every function in the body is controlled by hormones, and chemicals that target those hormones are interfering with our bodily function. So it's pretty broad. And you know,
So it is pretty broad. It's absolutely fascinating, and I really, really appreciate how great you are at describing it. Lots of people have tried to describe things like this to me before, but you really cut through.
great,
Um,
great, great.
how do you kind of triage as a, normal person? How do you triage what needs to be done, and how do you and how do you sort of prioritize things? So let's go back to the point that you make about some of the skincare products and that absorption, and I think in horror of everything I've already put on my face this morning. What do you do about that? Is there a, you know do you just go makeup free? Do you try and control the processes? Do you go for smaller batch, smaller brands, or are they all using it?
They're not all using it. There are some that are better. And by the way, we could have a little discussion about this, but there are ways to do less harm and more harm. And so I think safer or better is a good goal, although we cannot get maybe to safety or, completely safe. Okay, so I personally, I read labels.
Yeah.
I do go to Environmental Working Group and other websites that examine, and report on the product ingredients and whether they've been considered harmful. I actually, I mean, you can see I'm not wearing any makeup, right? I don't wear makeup. Um, I don't, do my nails.
You've got
I,
really
I
good skin though. You don't really need it.
Skincare, yes, I do put a product on my face that I think is okay from what I've checked out. Who knows, really? I haven't tested it.
Would you, so say, what would your recommendations be though? Like for people who don't have your good skin necessarily, um, maybe they're not as genetically fortunate. Um, should you, for example, buy like a small batch? Should you try and make your own? Should it be in glass rather than plastic? Do all of these things kind of matter?
Yes, I mean, in glass rather than plastic is a really good idea. Very hard to find, by the way. Um, and probably products in those tubes are probably lined with bisphenol A, although I don't know that for a fact.
Yeah.
But I would, if I was diving in here and writing a report on it, I would definitely want to know that. But I think given that the government is not, by the way, there are many, many more products in the EU, which I know England is not, Great Britain is not in anymore, but you can still read that are banned by the EU. I've heard very high numbers. I don't want to even quote them, but in the US, very few are banned.
Yeah.
Very few are banned. So
Yeah.
we have to be more careful, I think, in the US and use these apps. That's what we have. We are not able, we're not chemists. We can't go and,
Mhm.
so I would say, you know, do some homework. You can take your phone to the store and many of the labels, for example, Clearia is quite a good app that actually allows you to read the labels and tells you what's in the product. Yeah. So that's really all we can do. Be cautious consumers, use a minimal amount of product, try not to get anything that's contained in plastic if possible. Yeah, that's, and that's what I can do in that direction.
And sh
Um,
should people be more particular and more careful at different stages of their lives? So if
Absolutely,
they want to
absolutely,
conceive,
absolutely. I'm
yeah,
so glad you asked that.
yeah,
So, yeah, so if a couple is wanting to get pregnant or an individual, um, they have uh 3 months, it takes 3 months, it takes 70 days to make a sperm, okay? So in the approximately 3 months before, if you were timing this and not, it was not just happening some night, but if you could do this, you would for 3 months try to reduce your exposure. That's the first step, and that's of particular concern to the male because of the production of the sperm. The eggs have been there for a long time since since in utero the eggs were there, so that they've already been exposed to whatever. But once conception has occurred and the embryo fetus is developing, then that's an extremely critical time, definitely the most critical time in the entire lifespan of the individual. So at that point, the mother has this enormous responsibility to keep these chemicals away from her developing baby. And we, in my studies, our studies, what we do is we enroll pregnant women. We get their urine at various points in their pregnancy. And once you have the urine, you can measure the metabolites, the urinary metabolites, the products that are formed from the chemicals that are water soluble. Okay, so if it's going into water, it's going to show up in the urine. You can get the urine pretty easily, send it to a lab, and you did that, right?
Yeah.
You did, yeah. So you by testing your urine, you're getting the water soluble. If you wanted to get the fat soluble, which other chemicals are, then you would get your blood and have that tested. That's more difficult and much less commonly done. Harder to get a blood, go to the lab, put your arm out, get the blood taken. That's much harder than just collecting a urine sample. So, but yes, you can do that when you're pregnant. And we have recently conducted a study in a small number of couples trying to conceive, and larger studies in couples who have conceived, pregnant women, and we see what's in the body at various points in pregnancy, and then we see what's in the offspring in terms of developmental change.
What is your advice to minimize exposure through diet? Or is that not really where, could we be quite relaxed about packaging? Because actually,
Oh
no. Okay.
no. No, I try personally to shop. Not everyone can do this, shop in a farmer's market,
Yeah.
or on a food stand, where the produce is not packaged. You can't so easily do that for meats and so on. But I have, in our little study that was recently completed, I went around the supermarket with our participants and also one of their daughters. I said to her, let's make a game. Let's see how little plastic we can put in our shopping cart. And it was surprising, actually. So you go up to a produce area, and there you see heads of lettuce that are all wrapped up. But then in our supermarket, maybe, I'm sure not all, there are also areas where you can get the heads of lettuce not packaged. And I said to them, let's compare prices. So this is interesting. And the unpackaged ones were less expensive.
We usually have the reverse here.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, is it because it's in a different sort of market, or is it in the same market?
In the same market.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it
we
maybe tend to be organic.
Yes, and that's more expensive.
Yeah.
Right. That's true. That's true. Now, we also did that same with the fish. I went with this couple, and there was fish. She wanted to buy fish. Okay. So there was a packaged fish, all sliced up and wrapped up, and then there was a whole fish that the the fishmonger would cut up for her, right? And we compared the price of that, and again, it was the unwrapped that was less expensive. So that may not be in, or but that's our experience. So
That's probably the same because there's processing that's gone into slicing it and deboning it,
yeah,
billeting it. So yeah, that probably would be more expensive. The prepared.
but probably not per pound of eaten fish,
Yes.
of actually fish, because once you take of course, the skin and the head and all that off. So anyway, that was a little game that people could play for themselves. Let's compare. We buy this way, we buy it this way. And if, unless the difference is, unless it's quite a bit more expensive to buy it packaged, I would say protect yourself, particularly if you're pregnant
Yeah.
or planning to conceive, that you will buy this unpackaged. And I'm sure it depends on which supermarket and so on and so forth. And organic is an interesting question. So organic is really important, and it means that you're going to be buying something more expensive. There's no way around that because it costs more to produce these fruits and vegetables or organically. And so it's an inequity, if you will, that people who cannot afford to buy organic, or who don't even live near a market that sells organic,
Mm,
are being exposed, and probably ignorant of it
mm,
also, because they don't have the information, they don't have the time to learn this. People who are working, very, very busy and hard, and so I would say that one of the major inequities in our society is that poor people are overexposed compared to people who have more resources. And it's by the way, not only the food, it's also the air,
yeah.
right? Because these people who are poorer have living closer to manufacturing plants, closer to freeways, in more crowded conditions, and so on and so forth. So, when we talk about equity, we should be talking about pollution and exposure
Absolutely.
to these chemicals as well. Yeah,
Can I
yeah.
just ask you a little bit more about the exposure? What sort of chemicals do you get exposed to through plastic wrap and packaging? We're not are we talking about the same phthalate classes and or extra or different things?
So the packaging, PFAS is again really important. Um, the phthalates, the bisphenols, um, I would say those are the ones of most concern. But I'm not sure we even know all of them, honestly.
Because you're queen of the study and the intervention. Like, how did you get to that point of saying
Yeah.
this is what I need to dedicate myself to because this is absolutely vital?
A couple of aha moments. One was I was flying to Japan with a colleague, a chemist. We had a long flight, and he said, Shauna, you should look at phthalates. Okay. I think that was probably in the early 2000s. And I said, why? What are phthalates? So that brought me into phthalates. Well, let me go back first to a couple of years earlier. Um, I was asked to join a committee of the National Academy of Sciences. And this committee was formed to address the question, do chemicals in the environment threaten human health? So that sounds like a no-brainer now, but that was a long time ago. And the way these committees are formed, they have three groups. They have the people who are strongly pro, strongly anti, and neutral. And I was neutral because I had never heard of endocrine disrupting chemicals. They called it hormonally active agents in the environment, was their way of talking about endocrine disrupting chemicals. But by whatever name, I had not encountered them. I had worked in individual pollutants, but not this class. So I joined the committee, and met some really interesting colleagues who I remain close to, but also some opponents who I still fight against. And we spent several years on this question. So that I would say being on that committee was the first sort of wake-up call that this was an issue, that this was a concern. The next was, I would say, very soon after that, reading a paper out of Denmark, and that was 92, by the way, which said that sperm count had declined 50% in 50 years. And that very important paper came before the committee, and the committee said to me, because I was the only statistician there, they said, tell us, should we worry about this? And I said, I don't know. So I spent, and I'm a skeptic, that's my first approach. So I was like, probably not, you know. I spent several years answering that question and conducted several other studies to address that question. And we don't have time to go into that. But the answer was that after I had reanalyzed the data in several ways, the slope that they had, you know, this 1% per year decline, 50% in 50 years, was not changed at all, regardless of who the men were or whether they were obese or whether they smoked or blah, 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 blah. Those things did not explain the decline. So that was this really important moment for me because I said, okay, this is real, I think. And if it's real, what could it be? Can't be genetic because too fast. It's like 2 generations, right? And 50 years, 2 years. And so then it's environment. Gene environment, right? So if it's environment, what could it be? Right? So that was, so I actually designed a study to answer that question, got funding for it, conducted it. And that was a very large study where we looked at men giving their semen, and we thought, well, who should we get that would be representative? You don't want a special group of men who have problems or who you know, will go for vasectomy. They've been proven to have good, you know, so who should these men be? So I decided, let's take male partners of pregnant women. Because almost every pregnant woman goes to the doctor. So if you go in through a prenatal clinic and get the man, you're going to get a representative sample of at least men who conceive a pregnancy. They're not infertile. Okay. So we did that. And that was called a study for future families in 4 cities in the United States. And I'll just tell you one result from that, which is the most dramatic, which is that men living in Columbia, Missouri, where I was living, which is in the ag belt, you know, the corn and soy belt, which is heavily sprayed. Those men had only half as many moving sperm, half, as men living in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And they were selected in similar ways. They were similar men. And this said to me and others, wow, environment does seem to matter. And then we actually pinned it down and measured pesticides in the urine and showed, yes, the pesticides were related to the sperm count and so on. But that was just addressing the question of, does environment matter for sperm count? And the answer was yes. Yes. And I would say that was a really important turning point.
That's a very, very important point and a very neat summation of it. At what point did plastics specifically feature large?
Yeah. So back to John Brock and the plane going to Japan.
Yeah.
He said, you should study phthalates. And I said, why? And he said, because I'd never heard of them, by the way. And he said, because everybody is exposed to them. We now know that at CDC. We have tested random population. That's what they do, samples of the US population, and biomonitoring is called. And we know now that these phthalates are in everybody, including pregnant women, 1. 2, colleagues at the National Toxicology Program have shown that when you feed these phthalates to a pregnant rat or mouse, but I think they use rats, then the males are born with genitals that are not completely masculine. You've probably read those stories that are of ours? Yes. Okay. And so I thought that was incredible. And I thought, okay, that's mice or rats, but what about humans? And so that led me to another study, to design a study where we could ask that question. Now, remember the study of 4 cities in the United States and the semen quality, right?
Mm-hmm.
In that study, I had I don't know why, the great idea to save the urine of the pregnant woman, even though we didn't need it for anything at that time. How lucky. You're smiling because you understand now, right? So then we knew what
I'm
these
smiling
women
because
were.
I just love the way that you save everything.
Right. And so we said, oh my gosh, we can know by testing this urine whether the women were exposed to phthalates or how much. Yes. And then we can bring the children in and examine them and see if we can see what had then been called the phthalate syndrome. This is really important, Rachel, because there are no other syndromes named after a chemical class that I know of. So it was really important. And we did that. We got the urine that had been stored, we tested it, we brought the children in, we designed an exam that would mimic the rodent exam and measure things like how large are the how large is the scrotum, the penis, is the testes, are the testicles descended into the scrotum? And then most importantly, something which will, if you haven't heard of it, you'll go, what? And that's the anogenital distance. That had been used actually in toxicology for many, many years, I think since 1912, but they had not been used in humans, except for one very small forgotten study. So I showed that the anogenital distance is probably the most important marker, and that it is actually shortened by exposure to phthalates. The genitals originally in males and females are the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a single ridge. And then when testosterone is produced by the fetal testes, then it starts to be different in genetic males and genetic females. Okay. But it requires testosterone. It requires testosterone at the right time. Okay. And when it's there, then you see, instead of testicles, you see ovaries and so on and so forth. And then you get what you expect in a male and a female. But if there isn't that testosterone there at the right time, and the timing is really, for animals, it's like a few days. If you change the testosterone outside that window, it doesn't do anything. So it's really, really critical.
Amazing.
And if you remove, if the fetus does not see enough testosterone, then the male will not complete that journey to male typical genitals. And he will have a shorter AGD, smaller penis, less descended testicles, and so on and so forth. So that's the phthalate syndrome. Okay. So in order to look for it, we brought these babies back. We measured everything. The women were very kind to let us do that. And we saw that, yes, phthalates had been responsible for the phthalate syndrome in these women, in some of these women. Okay. So the last part of that story is that we then asked, so what? What does it matter if the AGD is shorter, right? What does it matter if the penis is a little smaller? I mean, the man minds, but
Well, I
in
mean,
terms
it
of
might be significant for that.
And so the question so then you say, okay, well, how do we figure out if it matters? Because these are babies, they're not going to be producing sperm for quite a while. So what we did was we made a big jump and we looked at college students. And we got their got the sperm count, and they let us measure their AGD. We paid them $75.
Oh, that's you
Right?
still got good value.
Yep. They
I'd
said
want
for
more.
70 for one of them said for $75 you can do anything. So there we found the phthalate syndrome in humans, and we showed that it affected sperm count. So the longer the AGD, the higher the sperm count. And then another colleague working in California showed that it was also related to fertility, that infertile men had a shorter anogenital distance. So that links prenatal exposure to phthalates, to low sperm count, and infertility. It's quite a nice
It's very
arc.
nice. It also really explains, I don't know if you can see that. Oh, you can't see it because I need to turn my back. But there's been a poster that's all been around Geneva of men in boxer shorts with plastic bottle penises, essentially. And that's essentially a
Yes.
visual form
Yes, yes,
of
yes,
your
yes,
research
yeah,
story.
yeah. I know the very nice Danish woman who produced this, and she's she's wonderful. Just to add to that, it's decreased fertility. It's also decreased, if you decrease testosterone, you're, I guess, decreasing masculinity in quotes, but you're also decreasing libido for women as well. And we asked our women, how, we measured the phthalates. I told you that. So then we asked them in the 24 hours before they gave the urine, how was their sex life? And we asked them how satisfied they were and how often they had sex. And higher levels of, and this is published, by the way, higher levels of phthalates were related to less frequent sex and less satisfaction with sex. So it's not completely a male story. Let me just answer your question about the aha moment, because there's one more I don't want to forget.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to emphasize that I've been a traditional academic for a very long time, NIH-funded studies, which I'm very grateful for, and publications, many hundreds of publications, and conferences and speaking in the academy. I call that all the academy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And after my book came out, it's Countdown. It's 2 words, published by Scribner, 2021. So after this, I got a lot of requests to go on, various talk shows and interviews. And I was interviewed by Joe Rogan. Do you know
Oh
who he
yeah. Oh
is?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
Okay.
yes.
So he actually gave me this aha moment, which has been very important to me. And I unfortunately have not had a chance to tell him this because I haven't seen him since. But at the end of the program, he said, after I told him this whole story that I've told you, he said, "Are you saying that toxins in the environment are threatening the future of the human race?" And I said, "Yes." And then came the aha moment, because he went like this, Richard. He said, "Can you see me?" He said,
Yeah.
"Why don't people know about this?" That question caused me to change my career,
Mm.
because I thought at that point, why? That's a great question. Why don't people know about this? And I thought about how I and my colleagues have only spoken to each other at scientific conferences, in journals. But who hears that other than other scientists? So I thought, okay, we must talk about this in a different way. And I designed the program that I now direct, which is called Action Science Initiative. And then the purpose of that is to take action with small groups of people who are concerned about an area of their health. It could be infertility, it could be obesity, it could be whatever, and see what happens if we reduce their exposure see if that improves their health. And I can't tell you in detail about the first intervention because we're quite new at this, but it was very successful. And the reason I can't talk about it is because it's the subject of a film that's under negotiation now for distribution. So now we're applying to in other areas. We find a problem related to an exposure. This was of couples that couldn't conceive. We found out what they were exposed to. We changed their exposure. We followed them. We got measured levels in their urine across time. And then we saw what happened to their success or their sperm count and so on. So another one, we hope to do something like this with Rosie Boycott. We hope to change school uniforms in a school setting and compare two schools, one that has clean uniforms and one has old style uniforms, and look at the immune response in the children when they come at 6 years, because they get the booster then, right? And then what is the response to that booster? Is it different depending on the uniform? I think this would be extremely powerful. I would say the lobbying by the chemical industry and by the oil industry, by the way, because we know, of course, that these products are made from fossil fuel byproducts. Yes?
Yeah.
And so there's a huge industrial, if you will, effort to dismiss harms. I don't like to say who is to blame. I think it's a blindness of everybody, which is facilitated, if you will, by industry downplaying any harms. So yes, there is responsibility, no doubt, by the manufacturers. However, it goes quite far back, because I will just tell you one example. I worked with a colleague who's working with a company that took PVC, which is a very polyvinyl chloride, out of the bags that we use in the hospital for the IV bags, and they substituted another chemical. They actually built a factory to produce IV bags without PVC, which they should get a lot of credit for.
Yeah.
They're expensive.
Yeah.
And when I asked my colleague, what do they use instead? He said polyolefin. And polyolefin is, of course, another. So when he went to this company and said, is this safer? Here's the kicker. They said, that is not our job. It is not our job to prove a chemical safe or not safe. It is their job to make the product and get the chemical that will produce the product that is needed for this function. So it's a terrible hole here. Whose job is it then to say that a new chemical that comes up and if a company comes up and says, oh, I'm going to do chemical X, it's going to be better. How do we know that? How do we test that? And I think this is probably the most important problem before us today, that we can point at the blame, that should be borne by industry, yes, but we also need to find safe alternatives. And this is a huge challenge. So that's what I have to say about that.
It's so amazing to get to talk to you. I can't thank you enough. I'm going off to read Countdown 2021. Listen to Joe Rogan.
Yes.
My first time.
And Andrew Huberman, by the way, he has a very good interview too. You know him?
I
Yeah.
doubt you give a bad interview, so
Okay.
I think the credit's on you, if I may say.
Thank you.
But yeah, thank you so much.
It was a
You've
pleasure. It
given
was a
me so
pleasure.
much. You give me so much to think about and write about. Thank you so
Lovely.
much.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank
Have a good
you. Thank
day.
you,
Thank
Sue.
you. Bye bye. Bye.
Incredible. Did you learn so much? Oh my God. Well, she gave us a good reading list and a watch list, top of which is the Netflix show. You mustn't miss it. And oh, no surprise, Joe Rogan got Shanna back on as a guest. Of course he did. She's absolutely brilliant. That's all from The Seagull Has Landed, this special edition, and I will see you soon. Bye.